The theme of these videos is starting to become theoretical sequels that are by no means predictions because an actual sequel is very unlikely to happen. Perhaps one day I'll be surprised and one of these low-selling games that I want sequels for will actually get a sequel, but for now, I must wait and hope. Oh, and speculate on what I think a sequel to Tokyo Mirage Sessions could and should look like if Intelligent Systems and Atlus ever want to give it another try. My sequel idea is not a direct sequel, so spoilers will not actually be a problem for this video, but I also won't go through too much gameplay detail, so it will be helpful if you at least have a general idea of what Tokyo Mirage Sessions is before watching. If you want to learn more about the game I'm talking about, take a look at my Why You Should Play video on it. As many of you know, Tokyo Mirage Sessions started out as a proposed crossover between the Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei franchises. It didn't really end up being that. Instead, it ended up being an Atlus RPG style game with some themes and characters coming over from Fire Emblem. However, the game was quite well done, especially when it comes to combat, so there's definitely good mechanics to work with while making a sequel. The original game is about performing artists working at an entertainment company while moonlighting as Mirage Masters wielding their power against otherworldly invaders. They battle using their own Mirages, which are Fire Emblem characters, and their abilities are determined by their Performa, which is basically their creative energy. It is a turn-based battle dungeon-crawling game with elemental and weapon-based weaknesses for enemies, and allies that can be targeted to chain together sessions and deal massive damage. The developers then have the choice of what things they want to stay the same, what things need refining, and what needs changing. I will start my thoughts on those different categories with the setting of the game. Of course, the sequel would also be based in Tokyo. I mean, it's in the name. If it's in the name, you generally want to keep it at least until the series is long enough running that it doesn't matter anymore, like for Fire Emblem. With the setting not changing then, I think the biggest change that should happen is the performing the characters are involved in during their time outside of battles. Tokyo Mirage Sessions was unapologetically focused on Japanese performance, specifically the idol industry. Even the few characters who weren't involved in the idol part of the game starred in TV shows or movies that took direct inspiration from popular Japanese shows or movies, such as Toma's Not Super Sentai series. Redoing the idol premise though I think would be a bit boring, so I propose that instead the new cast would be involved in another distinctly Japanese performing art. I would suggest no theater or kabuki theater as the performing art form that the characters could be part of. Personally, I lean more towards no, since it's the more obscure one. Of course, changing the performance art that the characters are engaged with will also mean the game will have a different cast than the original, which I think makes sense since their story has already been told. There is the question as to whether these new Mirage Masters should acknowledge the old ones, and I think that they should acknowledge Fortuna Entertainment. It would be too much hassle to explain away why the original cast isn't involved in very similar events to what they dealt with before. The other solution I have thought of is having this new company be a branch off of Fortuna Entertainment, allowing for both a new cast to take center stage while leaving the door open for cameos from the old cast. This idea, if balanced between giving the new characters time to become their own people and giving fans some idea of what the old cast is up to, could be the perfect solution. It is trickier to pull off though than the completely separate part. In any case, once again, Tokyo is being invaded by Mirages intent on stealing Performa, and our new cast shall battle it out. But in order to do so, they'll need some new Fire Emblem Mirages to battle with. One of the issues Fire Emblem spin-offs have run into recently has been that they focus on the cast of the Arcanea games and Fates at the expense of many others. And yes, I'm including Awakening among the Arcanea games. My idea to fix this starts with the main character of the cast, who would have an ability similar to the protagonist of the Persona games and be able to swap Mirages. This idea does take the individuality of the characters out that was seen with Chrom and Cheetah and the other Mirages in the first game, but the sequel could choose to make one a primary Mirage that fills that role in the story and helps recruit the other Mirages for our main character's sake. In order to keep it reasonable though, the main character could be limited to Mirages of main Fire Emblem lords, so they're not overwhelmed by having every single character in Fire Emblem at their disposal. For instance, the primary lord could be Celica, but if the situation calls for an axe user in battle, they could swap to Hector instead. For the supporting cast, a way of highlighting more Fire Emblem characters could be to basically have roles characters fulfill, but then the player gets to choose which Fire Emblem character appears. For instance, for our Pegasus Rider character, I could choose between various Pegasus Riders from any of the games in the series, ranging from Pala to Ingrid. Once again, this would sacrifice depth of character, but it could be managed the same way as I proposed for the main character with a primary Mirage that's a fleshed out character, but for battle, I can choose for a different Fire Emblem character of the same class to appear instead of the primary Mirage. It would be a nice shout out and a way for players to customize their party while also avoiding the critiques of favoritism towards certain games in the series that happened with warriors or heroes. For the battle system itself, I don't really see the need for much in the way of changes or adjustments. Tokyo Mirage Sessions' battle system is excellent, with my only idea being adding daggers in as a weapon, now that more characters can be used for that type from the Fire Emblem side of things. For gameplay then, the main thing I think needs a lot of work is the level making. Basically, the game needs better dungeons than the first game did. While they looked alright, I can't help but feel these curated levels pale in comparison to the elaborate and thematic dungeons seen in Persona 5. Hitting that level may be difficult, but at least making traversing the level more engaging than just running around solving basic puzzles and hitting enemies would be nice. If they do choose No Theater to be an inspiration, given its connection to spirits, ghosts, and dreams, incorporating those aspects into the dungeons would make for good parallels to the cast's role in the real world. On the other hand, Kabuki's focus on historical plays could offer chances to make dungeons inspired by Japanese history. The final idea I have is making levels inspired by major Fire Emblem locations, such as having a level at Garreg Mach Monastery. The options are open to those with the creativity to make them happen, and I think the game would benefit greatly from increased focus on dungeon design. The outside side quests could also use an upgrade for a sequel, since for the most part they were completely forgettable. Perhaps making them given by recurring NPCs or even party members would make them more engaging. Either that or offering better rewards for completing them could make them more worthwhile. For the character side stories, I really enjoyed those in the first game. If the developers want to expand it though, I would encourage more cast interactions in these periods. You can still give time for the main character to spend one-on-one time with the side character, but as part of the efforts of making this group feel like a cohesive set of friends, having the rest of the characters involved would only help. That said, I think the writing doesn't need much changing since I was satisfied with the original blend of optimism and creative passion. Although, if they do choose for another main character like Itsuki, giving him a stronger personality would be helpful because it gives the other characters more to build off of. Or they can just go with the Tsubasa type like they probably should have in the original game. On the presentation front, honestly, there's not too much I would change. The only thing that would change for me would be the art and music being more connected to No or Kabuki Theater if they went that route. If they stayed with the idol theme, I do think they'd have to do something to make sure the game stayed distinct from the original, otherwise it wouldn't stand out when the two are compared. The graphics themselves looked good and the music was excellent. There could be UI improvements, especially for navigating the city, such as indicating where characters or events are. With that improved though, the only thing left to choose is the color theme. I really want it to be purple, since they shouldn't redo green and Persona already took blue, yellow, and red. Other than that, making sure all the streamlined improvements that came in Encore are in the sequel is a must. I still can't figure out how people sat through the animations for Sessions every single time in the Wii U version. That legitimately would have added hours to game time based on my completely unproven calculations. Like with the last game I did a Sequelitis video on, I will refrain from hazarding a guess at a release date because I'm pretty sure my release date prediction would be never. I think we'll likely get a Fire Emblem Warriors 2 before we get a Tokyo Mirage Sessions sequel, and honestly, I also think Warriors 2 is unlikely, so the world of Fire Emblem spin-offs seems rather bleak at the moment. I wouldn't mind being proven wrong though. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is a good game and has many concepts that could be expanded and explored. It may be unlikely, but I hope at some point Atlus and Intelligent Systems revisit the game and take the potential series to the next level. If they did, I think a special game could come of it that does a better job of satisfying Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei fans, while hopefully steering clear of the controversy of the original. Please leave a like, because doing so improves my performa, and I need some help beating these Mirages. Comment below your thoughts on what a Tokyo Mirage Sessions sequel would look like, and subscribe for more video game content. I hope to see you all in the next video. Have a great day, and happy gaming.